Hi everyone, and welcome to the next part in this series where I'm going to teach you how to Dockerize your Django web application with Docker. Alright, so let's get started. Now the first thing that you need to do is have a simple Django project open and available, and make sure that you're within that particular environment, make sure you're seeded into it, and make sure it's running live just for the moment, like I have. Okay, so don't worry about the size or complexity of your Django web application. It can literally be a simple one that literally just prints hello world. It's literally doesn't matter, okay? Or if it's a complex one, medium size, doesn't really matter. Okay, so just make sure you have a simple Django web application. So in this case, I am literally using the Django web application project that I was working with in my Django series. So it's good sometimes to reuse code and not just throw things away. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like. So very simple. So it's Taskly, a home for your tasks. So it just has a register page, login page, and a few other pages. You know, very simple, very, basic. Okay, so that's all you need for now. Now, the next thing you need to do is you need to generate a requirements.txt file. Now, you're probably wondering, why on earth do I need to generate that? We're not deploying. So, true, that is a good point. But in order for our Docker image to be built, it needs to be aware of what packages to install on that particular Docker image in order for it to be run on the container and so on. And Docker also is going to need to know all of our files within our root directory, but more on that soon enough. So the key thing to take away from this is you need to generate a requirements.txt file. So what you can do is, if you have your server running, just go ahead and stop it. So to do that, you can just press Control-C, very simple. And what I want you guys to do is just generate a requirements.txt file. So you can say pip freeze, and then requirements.txt, and just go ahead and generate that. All right, there we go. There's our requirements.txt file generated. Right, so there's our requirements.txt file, so you can open up and you should see all the packages that you have installed. All right, perfect. So that's the first step. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a Dockerfile. Now, before we go into that, I just want to explain something simple here. So if we go to this website here called hub.docker.com, okay, you can go ahead and sign up if you'd like, but I just want to show you something here. If you scroll down on their webpage, you'll be able to see different types of Docker images here. Some based on Postgres, BusyBox, Python, Ubuntu, HTTPD, and so on. So we are going to use a Python-based image here, okay, which is sort of going to be like a base image, you could say, for our Docker image. Since Django, of course, is a Python web framework, it would make sense to use a Python-based image here. Okay, so we are going to use this, okay, which will be the basis of our Docker image, okay, and you can see there are multiple versions here. So all the way from a 3.7 Alpine, all the way to 3.11 Bullseye. Now, we are going to be using, for the purpose of this tutorial, 3.8 Buster. Now, do bear in mind, okay, this may differ according to your Python version. So in my case, I have, just so you're aware, I have Python 3.9.13. So if for some reason during this tutorial there's something amiss here, just double check which Python-based image you're using here and just, trial and error and figure it out. But generally, for most of us, this should be more than sufficient. And if you're close enough to that Python version, it doesn't have to be exact, because you can, as you can see here, I'm using Python 3.9.13, and I'm able to run 3.8 Buster, which we're going to be utilizing for our Docker file. So you really need to, use your own intuition here and judgment. So just be aware of that. Okay, so sometimes you just need to, be a bit resourceful and, try things on your own. I mean, you guys are aware you're developers. Okay, so I just wanted to show you this so you're at least aware of it. Okay, so let's get started. Now, we want to create our Docker file, and this will be situated within our root directory. So I'm just going to create a new file in our root directory called Dockerfile. And as soon as you type in Dockerfile, you'll see a small whale icon appearing. So this indicates that that Docker file is being recognized as a Docker file. I know that sounds a bit weird, but that's just how it is. And we can just go ahead and create it. You don't need to add any extensions. As long as you see the whale, which is Docker's main icon, you can just press enter. Very simple. Okay, so that's perfect. So I just want to add some lines because we're about to add some stuff. Okay, so let's get started. Now, you're probably wondering what on earth is a Docker file. So simply put, this Docker file is kind of a text document, okay, that is going to contain a list of instructions, okay, that are going to be used for eventually building and composing our Docker image at a later state. So we're literally just giving Docker instructions. So see it as like an instruction manual for Docker. So try and see it in that way. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add that base Docker image, okay? And we already looked at that here, and this will be based on Python, okay? We need this because Django is based on Python, as I mentioned earlier on. Right, so the first thing we need to do is we need to add a base Python image, okay? So to do that, we're going to say from Python, okay? And then we're just going to say colon, 3.8, and then we're going to say dash buster. Okay, now if you're wondering where this comes from, okay, I'll just show you again. So if you scroll down here, we're using this one right here. Okay, so remember, like I said, Django is a Python-based web framework, so this is one of the reasons why we'll be utilizing this, since that's what we need for Docker. Next, we need to add in the following command here, which is env python buffered equals 1. Okay, so basically this line ensures that any Python input that we have, okay, is sent to our container log. So all of the Python output that we get will be sent to our logs for our container, and this can be very helpful, you know, for managing any errors or just diagnosing any errors or debugging and whatnot. So that is the reason for that line. Next thing that we need to do is we need to create a directory, okay? This will be a directory for our Django project here, as you can see. So we need to call this workdir, which stands for work directory, and we need to say /, and we can name this anything that we would like. Okay, I typically name it Django, so if you want to follow for the sake of this tutorial, go ahead and do the same as me and just say Django. Simple. Next thing that we want to do is we want to, you know, copy our requirements.txt file that we have here. Okay, so we need to copy this over to our Docker file. So we can say copy, and then we can say space requirements.txt, and we need to state this a second time. So we need to say it again. Okay, that's just the way this Docker file works. Okay, I'm not too sure on the intricacies of why that is, but we just need to copy our requirements.txt file twice. Next thing that we need to do is we need to specify, the next thing that we need to specify in our Docker file is what are we going to do with this requirements.txt file. So we're telling Docker basically, okay, I want you to copy this from my base directory, this requirements.txt file. And Docker is probably wondering now, why on earth am I just copying it? What can I do with this? So we want to tell Docker, okay, hey, I want you to actually run this requirements.txt file once we've built our Docker image and run it as a container. So you can just say run pip3 install, okay, and then you're going to say requirements.txt. Okay, perfect. Okay, now since we've copied our requirements.txt file, we need to go ahead and actually copy our entire directory, our entire project. That's what we want to copy over now. So to do that, you can just say copy, and then space point, and this is going to copy everything in our root directory for our project. So we want to copy everything, and eventually what's going to happen is basically the whole basis of a Docker image is like a compressed version of our entire project. So it's compressed and all built together in a application that is Dockerized or compartmentalized. Okay. Now the next step, okay, before we can do the next step, okay, we need to install a package called gunicorn. Now gunicorn or gunicorn, I'm not sure how it is pronounced, it has different ways of pronunciation. So basically it is used to serve our application as a WSGI application. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that next part. Right, so we can go ahead and install this package here that you see, a gunicorn. So all I'm going to do is I'm simply just going to install that. So we can just say pip install gunicorn, okay, like so. So go ahead and install that. Okay, and it's all set. Okay, so I just want to be clear here. So make sure that you have gunicorn here in your requirements.txt file. So I have it here somewhere, if I can just look for it, and there I have it. So make sure that you install it to this requirements.txt file. So if you must, okay, what you can do actually, okay, now that we're here, I'll delete this. Okay, and just for the purpose of you all following along, we can go ahead and just generate a new requirements.txt file. So I'm just going to say pip freeze, okay, requirements.txt. So go ahead and just install it, run it again. Okay, now you will automatically see that gunicorn is now in your requirements.txt file. So we're just kind of backtracking there as we go through it. So be sure to do that and check that you have gunicorn here. Just make sure that you have it. Okay. So don't worry, nothing wrong is going to happen. That's just a step I just wanted to include there. Okay, now the important thing that we need to do, first of all, is we need to see what is our WSGI application name. So if you go to your settings.py, okay, just scroll down until you see, let's see if I can find it, WSGI. So let's see if we can see it. There we are. WSGI application, this is what you're looking for. And you just want to look at two things here. You just want to look for the following, and that is this here. So in this case, I have taskly.wsgi. So go ahead and look in your Django project and look for this here. Okay, now yours will be unique here. It will generally be the name of your Django project and then followed by .wsgi. So just bear this in mind, very important. Of your own project, okay, not mine, of your own. So have a look at that. All right, so let's get back to it. Right, so we need to now enter the following line of code here. So I will explain this as I go. So we need to say cmd, and then we need to say gunicorn, sorry, and then we need to just add a space. And then if you look in your settings.py, so I have taskly.wsgi. So go ahead and look at your own WSGI and get the code from here. So I'm just going to copy that there, and I'm just simply going to paste it here. Then I'm just going to say colon, and I'm going to say application, 2 dashes, and I'm going to say bind, and then I'm going to bind this to 0.0.0.0 colon 8000. So 8000, as you know, is our localhost. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to expose our port, but you're probably wondering what on earth does this line of code do? So simply put, okay, we are going to run a command, okay, that will be based on gunicorn for our application here, which is in this case taskly.wsgi, and we are going to bind all the IP addresses. So this 0.0.0.0 specifies all IP addresses, and we're going to bind this to port 8000, which is our localhost port. Okay, so this is the whole idea of understanding containers as well. So we're going to expose eventually port 8000 to connect to any IP address, IPv4 address. So that is basically what is going here, and we're just binding it together. Okay, now the last thing that we want to do is we want to just expose port 8000. So the whole purpose of this is just to show which port will be exposed in our image, and that is port 8000. It doesn't bear much functionality. It's just very simple. So we're just going to say expose and then 8000. Okay. And I also want to elaborate a bit more on this line here. So some of you are probably confused. So this is just pretty much the command that we're going to be running for our Dockerfile to actually run this. This is the command that we'll be running within our Docker container, okay, and it's going to bind IP addresses to port 8000. All right, so that's simply what's going on here. All right, so that's it for our Docker file here. Okay, we still have more to do, but this is our basic Docker file. So these are the instructions which are going to be run in order to build our Docker image eventually on. Now, one more thing I want to mention here. We do have a virtual environment file here, okay? And one important rule that you guys should follow is not to add in your virtual environment to your Docker file for your Docker image. This is not helpful, let's just say that. So what we need to do is add a new file in this base directory or root directory, and we can call this .dockerignore. Okay, so you'll also see it has a Docker logo there, the whale. So you can simply type in here your virtual environment name. So mine is called venv, like that. Save it, and what's going to happen is when you run this Docker file, okay, or when you get set to build your Docker image, what's going to happen is this virtual environment is going to be ignored. So you don't need to worry if you run your Docker image in the container, it's not going to run with it. So that's the whole purpose of this here. Okay, so go ahead and do just that. All right, so that's it. So we can close this up here and settings.py. Okay, so that's it on the Docker file. So in the next part, we are going to set up our Docker Compose file, which is the next step. So we will be utilizing our Docker Compose file to actually build our Docker image, and we're also going to utilize it to actually run our Docker container. So the Docker Compose file is going to work in tangent with our Docker file. Okay, so that is the next step. So let's get straight to it. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a Docker Compose file. So a Docker Compose file is basically a YAML file. Okay, so YAML is basically a data serialization language that is very readable and easy to understand. I prefer it well over JSON. I mean, JSON is good, but YAML so much better. So let's get started. So we need to create a Docker Compose file in our base directory. So I'm just going to create a new file called docker-compose.yaml. So the YAML extension is .yml, and you'll automatically see that the Docker logo appears again. Now the whale is in a pinkish reddish color. Okay, so that's it. Now let's get started with setting up everything up. Now the first thing that we need to specify is the version of Docker. So of course you can check out something called the compatibility matrix, I believe. I'm not exactly sure what the name is, where it will give you a list of all the versions of Docker. So we're going to use the latest version, which is 3.8. So we can just say version, okay, and then in double quotes 3.8. Perfect. Next thing that we need to specify are the services that will be utilized in this Docker image. Okay, so we are only going to use one service, and that is going to be our simple Django application. So we can just go ahead and just say services. Okay, and then we just need to add some indentation, and we can just say app. Okay. Next thing that we need to do is we need to actually build everything in our root directory here, our base directory. We want to build everything. So in our Docker file here, okay, we copied everything here. And now in our Docker Compose file, we want to actually build everything. So just under app here, you just want to now add a space and say build. Now do bear in mind that indentation and spacing is important. So just watch carefully as I do it. So I'm just going to add a colon and say point. So this is to indicate I'm copying everything in our root directory. Right, the next thing that we want to do is add something called volumes. So I'm just going to say here volumes, and we only have one volume. So I'm just going to add a space dash space dot colon, and then I'm going to add a / Django. Now you'll notice that this correlates to our working directory, which is Django, which encapsulates our entire project. So that is what we're referencing to here, our directory here. Now, basically, okay, we are referring to a folder, and that is our directory. So that is what we're referring to here as a volume. And we're linking this folder, okay, which is to a container which will eventually be running. Okay, and this references to a Django, the working directory, that is our volume here. Okay, perfect. Now let's do the next part. The next thing that we want to do is we just want to simply define our ports. So here, make sure everything's in line, and you just want to say ports. Okay, and you just want to add a space, and it's another space, and you can say 8,000 to 8,000. So we're mapping port 8,000 to 8,000. So that is the parts that we are going to define. So basically we want to enable mapping across our ports so that we can actually access our container when we need to. So that was the reason why we exposed here port 8,000, so that we'll be able to bridge this connection. Okay, now let's move on to the next part. So make sure everything's in line as mine is. We need to now go ahead and name our Docker image. So in this case, I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm just going to say application, and I'm going to tag it with the name, I'm going to tag it with the name Django. Okay, so you can name your image anything you want and tag it anything you want. Right. So let's set a container name. Now this is optional, you do not need to set this, so this will basically be our container name when we run our Docker container. Now if you do not set one, it's just going to give you a default name for your container, so it's not that important. So here I'm just going to say app underscore container, very simple. And the last thing we want to do is we want to set a command. So this is the command that we want to execute when we are running our Docker file. So basically it's identical to the one we have here, which we can copy exactly this as it is. Now I'm going to give you a bit more information on this again, because I feel that my explanation wasn't so accurate here. So basically, like I said earlier on, okay, we are going to bind our application, okay, to all IP addresses here, okay, and basically these IP addresses, okay, are going to be exposed to port 8,000, which is based on our Django application. So that's all that we're doing here. So that is the purpose of this command that we are running here. Okay, so what we've done now, we have gone ahead and we have created a Docker Compose file and a Docker file. So the next thing that we will need to do is we will need to go ahead and build our Docker image, and that is really exciting, so let's get straight to it. All right, so to build a Docker image, you can simply go to your console, make sure that you're in your project, and you can just say Docker Compose build. Simple as that. Okay. So let's just wait for it to execute. And there we go, there's the build. So usually for the first time, if you haven't ever used this before, it will take quite a while. So don't be alarmed, just let it do its thing, let it build everything and set it up. Okay, so just let it take its time. And I'm gonna actually pause the video until this is done. And then I'm going to show you the final output. So let it run, let it build. So it's going to build our Docker image for us. All right. So there we go. So we can now see that our Docker image is built. Now, don't worry, okay, if you have any problems. Usually the problems come with the packages in our requirements.txt file. So I had the same issue. I had to build a few times. So just go to your requirements.txt file and comment out those packages that are causing issues with your Docker build here. So do bear that in mind. I know it will happen with quite a few of you. It always does. So it's always a trial and error thing when it comes to deployment, Dockerization, everything. So as you can see here, I had to comment out a few things. So just bear that in mind, okay? So don't worry about that. Now back to explaining what we have here. So you can clearly see some of the instructions that we had based on our Docker file and our Docker Compose file with the command. As we can see here, for example, we stated that we wanted our virtual environment to be ignored in Docker ignore. Also, we can see that it loaded the build, it built our project here, and it cached our work directory, which was Django. It copied all the requirements all the packages in our requirements.txt file, installed it, copied our project, and exported it as a Docker image. So you can see the whole process of all the instructions that we set out and laid out, as you can see here. Okay, so that's that. So what we can do is we can actually see our Docker image in Docker Desktop. So we can head over here, and you won't see it the first time. So usually you need to close Docker Desktop and just reopen it. So let's just open it again. So I'll just wait for it to open up. Okay, there it is. And there is our image. So if you got to this point, well done. You have successfully built your Docker image for your Django application. Well done. This is a really big achievement, and I hope you guys have really got to this point. Okay, so that's it. So you'll see a little bit about the name, our tag, the image ID when it was created, and the size. Okay, so that is the first step. So that is how we would build our Docker image. Now you're probably wondering, how on earth do I actually run this within a container? So basically, Docker containers transform Docker images, okay, into a format in which it can be run within a structure, which is known as a container. Okay, so let's go ahead and do just that. All right. So let's actually now run our container. So now that we've built our Docker image here, let's go to our CMD and we can just say docker-compose up. Okay, so this is going to run our container. So it's very quick. And there we go, our container is running. So we can head over to containers here and we can now see that it is running. So first of all, it will show our project name. So in this case, mine is Taskly. It will show your project name first. And if you click on this drop down here, it's going to show your container name. So it's called app container here. And we define this in our Docker compose YAML file like so. Okay, so technically you can go ahead and test this out. So what you can do is you can just head over to the following, press enter, and there you go. So your Docker container is now running and set and ready to go. Now there's just something I want to mention. Now, I know a lot of you are probably wondering, why is it with a G unicorn and not with something else? So technically speaking, you can simply put something in here like Python manage.py. You can replace this out. And the reason that I put a G unicorn here instead, in this case, with your taskly.wsgi in this case, is because this would be production ready for a production environment. Okay, so this is the reason for doing this. I mean, technically speaking, you could do Python manage.py and go from there, but I just prefer to use G unicorn in this case when I'm working with production environments. So that is the reason for this. I mean, you can switch this out for sort of Python manage.py or some sort of variant that you can investigate and take a look at. All right, so that's it. So now you're able to build Docker images, as you can see here, and you're also able to run Docker containers, as you can see here. Okay, so that's it, guys. I hope this helped you. I know this was a bit of a long-ish video, but I hoped it was of value to you and it made sense. So Docker can be sometimes a bit of a challenging topic, but this is technically in a nutshell how you would quickly set up a Docker container for your Django web application and quickly containerize it and get it set and ready to go. Now, the most important thing to bear in mind is this can take a long time. So I'm going to be honest. So there's a good chance that by watching this tutorial, you're not going to get it right the first time. That usually is the case. So the main thing that you need to be on the lookout for is your requirements.txt file and packages that can conflict. That is the number one reason why Docker will fail. You also need to double check everything in your application. Make sure if you, for example, deleted a package, okay, make sure that you've also removed all the references in your code to that package, because what can happen is your Docker image can build successfully, but it can fail when you are running your container. So do bear that in mind when starting up Docker and so on. So just pretty much remember, you may need to battle it out with trial and error on your packages in requirements.txt. That's the main advice that I can give you on this here. Okay, and also just be wary of the spacing and the indentation as I show you here. So as we can see, command, container, image, ports, volumes, and build are all lined up nicely. App is on its own, and services and version are on the same line. And in terms of Dockerfile here, same sort of thing goes for that. Okay, just be sure to check everything carefully. And also make sure to set everything up according to your own project. So in this case, my project is Taskly, so make sure you set it to your own application. Make sure you bind everything correctly, and so on. Okay, so if you're wondering how to stop your container, you can simply just click on it here. And you can just say stop. I'm just going to delete this actually, so I'm just going to say stop. Okay, it will gray out. Then you can delete this here. And delete it. and head over to your images, and only then can you delete your image. So do bear note that if, for example, you're running your Docker container, your Docker image will be in use within that container. So just be sure to go ahead and delete your Docker image. Very important to do that. So make sure you delete it afterwards. You won't be able to delete it while the container is running, so do bear that in mind. Okay, so that's it, guys. I hope that helped, and thank you again.